The movie starts with a character select menu from an old fighting game, and there's Roy as player 1 and other 8 characters to select from. Mr. Good Morning walks into an apartment of Roy with a machete and turns off a ringing phone. The caller was named Brett and proceeds to the bed where he finds Roy with a woman. Mr. Good Morning tries to kill Roy with the machete, but Roy handles him very easily. Then he says that he's been doing the same thing over 140 times. And that's when the helicopter shows up and a soldier was firing a minigun into the apartment, but Roy doesn't seem to be bothered as he's done this so many times, and he throws a knife at the soldier and hides behind a couch while looking at a picture of himself with the woman that he loved. After the helicopter crashes into his apartment, Roy jumps out of the window and lands onto a big truck filled with sand. He explains that he's missed this truck 22 times and he's seen falling to the ground and being run over by the same truck. He then takes the car from a man and drives off, but he's followed by 2 women in a minivan, Esmeralda, who's driving, and Pam, who shoots at him. While he's running away from them, he forgets that there was a bus that he had to avoid and crashes into it, sending him through the window into the bus, which kills him. Roy then wakes up again with the same things happening to him and introduces all the people trying to kill him. First there's Pam, who shoots at him from the minivan, who's killed him 14 times before he figured out the timing. Then there's Guan Yin, who wields a sword, Kaboom, who's a dwarf with bombs, and Roy lists off names like Pam, Smiley, and the German twins, and whenever he tries to avoid them, they always find and kill him. Wait, hold on. Did you subscribe to our channel? Come on guys, you're here, you're watching the video, help us out by hitting the subscribe button as it really helps out me and my team to make more videos for you guys. And now, let's get back to the recap. He calls Dr. Gemma Wells, the woman he loves, who would have the answers to things happening to Roy. But a man picks up the phone, Clyde Vender, who's Gemma's boss, and tells Roy that Gemma had died in the lab. Roy wants to find out why and how she had died, but has never lived long enough to find out. In attempt number 140, Roy kills Pam and Esmeralda and goes into a noodle shop, which is run by Jake, and asks for 2 bottles of baijiu. As he sits down to drink, there's Dave next to him talking about security threats because he's a securities expert. Dave always talks about the exact same thing no matter what Roy says to him. Then at 11:05, a famous Chinese sword fighter, Dang Fang, walks in, and Roy keeps drinking and numbing his pain until 12:20, where Dave gets up and leaves the cafe. At 12:47, the assassins always get to him, so he drinks till then until they find and kill him. It seems as though he was stuck in this loop with no way of getting out. He decides to come up with a plan to get back at the people who did this to him, and as he puts it, yesterday was a month ago. The day before all of this kicked off, Roy gets to visit Gemma at her lab. He's happy to see her, but she seemed nervous. He hands her over a resume, and she continues to measure him with a tape measure and also puts down his weight, all the while she's being watched by Clyde. Roy looks at a big round machine, then asks her what it is, and she tells him that she's worked on it for 5 years and is supposed to unmake all of time and space. Roy then finds a picture of their son Joe and takes the picture from the frame. As Roy and Gemma were talking, Brett, the security head of the company, walks in and takes Roy's resume. Clyde doesn't seem to like Roy and instructs Brett to find people to follow Roy in case he tries to do something that could endanger the work of the company. Gemma takes some hair off Roy and tells him about a present that she sent him a few days ago. When Brett walks in to take her to Clyde, she hugs Roy and tells him to remember Osiris. In his office, Clyde tells Gemma about a story where he was in Burma fighting rebels and saw a wild boar being eaten by a python, and he tells her that she needs to work on their project faster and inform him if there are any details. That night, Roy was in a bar flirting with a woman called Alice, who's a dental hygienist. Gemma calls him at the bar and she's putting her hair into a tube and tells him that she might have to do something drastic and that she needs his help, and that's when Clyde cuts off the signal. He finally gets to the present that she sent him, and it was a book about Isid and Osiris. And as Roy was reading the note she left on the back of the book, he'd forgot about the helicopter who shoots him down. Roy wakes up at tech number 144. He makes it past his apartment in Pam. He goes to an underground arcade to read the book, and in the arcade, he finds Joe and wants to talk to him and tells him that his mother had died. He finds Joe playing a game and talks to him, finding out that Joe had ditched school. They go out together to get some lunch, and as they were talking and making their way out of the arcade, Roy looks at a clock saying that the time was 12:50, which is 3 minutes longer than he's ever lived. This is when he figures out that they were tracking him somehow, and as usual, he gets found by the assassins and dies. He wakes up again, but this time, he asks Mr. Good Morning about how they were tracking him, but he doesn't tell him. He then goes to the noodle cafe to ask Dave how they track someone, and Dave explains that the best way to track someone without them knowing is to put the tracker in their teeth. He remembered Jen putting him under anesthesia and find out that she had put a tracker in his tooth. He talks Dave into looking at his teeth, but they will need to be pulled out, so he pulls out his molars one by one until they find the tooth with the tracker in it. Attempt number 145, he catches Jen before she can run out, and she tells him that Brett was the one who put the tracker in his tooth. He goes to the noodle cafe and pulls out the tracker and uses it to trap the assassins. First it's Pam, who was using Hitler's gun to kill Roy, and he then traps Smiley, and one by one he gets all of them. He puts them in a pile and uses Kaboom's bombs to blow them all up. He picks up an assassin's phone and it's Brett on the other line, so Roy tells Brett that he's coming for them, and after the phone conversation, he pulls up to the company's building and decides to crash past the walls, but the walls were too strong and he gets caught and shot by Brett. He then sees Roy too, walking out and dressing up like him to fool the guards into letting him in, but he doesn't have a weapon. He keeps trying to get into the building, and one at a time, he gets closer and closer, until he finally makes it to the office of Clyde, where he is met by Guan Yin, who keeps killing him, and he is given the same speech by Clyde over and over again, but one time, he lives long enough to find out that the machine that he saw back in Gemma's office was the reason for all of this, and the Osiris Spindle, as Clyde called it, is a book where Osiris is resurrected by Isit, and this happens after his death to be the Lord of the Dead in the afterlife, which is very similar to what he's going through. He figured out that Gemma had put him in the machine so he could stop them from using it, and he needed a way to get past Guan Yin. He needed someone who could fight with a sword, and that's when he goes to Ding Fang and asks him to train him in her technique. Roy keeps training and fighting Guan Yin multiple attempts until he finally defeats her at attempt number 200. And after that, he makes quick work of Brett as well. So the only one left now was Clyde, and Roy decides to fight him hand to hand. As Roy was telling Clyde about how Gemma put him in the Osiris Spindle, Clyde stops him and tells him that while Roy was out for revenge, his son Joe was in danger all along. Once Roy finds out that Joe's in danger, he races over to the arcade and finds that his son has been killed already and that he was too late. As he was trying to get through the police lines and being held down by two cops, an explosion happens behind them, and it was the Osiris Spindle with a big enough explosion to end the world. With no hope left in him, Roy gives up trying to save Gemma or Joe and wakes up every morning letting the assassins kill him over and over again because he sees no point in getting up and trying to save them because they will all die in the end and he was too late to take any action. But one of those mornings, he wakes up and decides that there's no reason to be depressed and stay in bed. He gets up and decides to go and meet up with his son and spend some time with him, and he heads to the arcade to find Joe. Joe and Roy talk about video games and enter the arcade to play Street Fighter and other old video games together. They end the day sat on a beach with Roy holding Joe, who's asleep, as the Osiris Spindle explodes, and they have done this dozens of times now, and Roy wants to keep doing it because in this place, he has found peace. So on the next attempt, Roy goes back to all those steps to get to Clyde, but he was a few minutes too late to save Gemma. They wanted to gain control of the Osiris Spindle, but Gemma had sabotaged it somehow, and they could not get it to function. As Brett was telling him this, Clyde figures out that it was Roy, and he was the missing mass that made the Osiris Spindle fail, and Clyde found out that Roy was living the same moments over and over again. And Roy looks at the security footage of Gemma being killed by Brett and calculates that he has 14 minutes to get to Gemma to save her. On the next attempt, he quickly kills Mr. Good Morning, he jumps out of the window onto the helicopter, and the soldier with the minigun is scared off the edge of the helicopter by Roy, who then scares the pilot to fly over the company. He catches the assassin in an elevator together going to the meeting, and he uses the minigun to kill them all at once, saving time. After that, he makes his way down to the lab, getting past all the guards along the way, and once he gets to the lab, he finds Gemma there. She was worried about Joe, but Roy had taken care of anyone who could be a danger to Joe, and tells her that he's been spending a lot of time with Joe. Then Gemma tells him how to stop the Osiris Spindle from exploding, and she explained that the missing mass was Roy himself, and that he would have to enter the core of the machine to fix everything. Roy then walks into the machine, fusing himself with the core and ending the cycle to save his family and the world. And with that, the movie comes to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed the recap. Make sure to leave me a like, leave a comment, also subscribe to my channel. I love you guys so much and I promise to see you on my next recap. Bye!